Guten Tag, WAP. This is Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we go over Unit 4, Day 19. Today we're going to talk about Asia, specifically Japan, after World War II, and Japan's developments after World War II. But let's get started with our daily punishment. Did you hear about the guy who got hit on the head with a can of soda? He was lucky it was a soft drink. Key terms for today: the Japanese miracle, the Korean War, the Little Tigers, and the Vietnam War. Not that many. We're going to go over the Japanese political and economic developments after World War II and Southeast Asia after World War II. So let's talk about Japan after 1945. Basic political economic history. If you remember, America won World War II. They dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After World War II, America is going to occupy Japan to help create a stable democracy at first. America will break up the Japanese zaibatsus, which are the large factory combines that are huge industrial centers that usually include multiple goods. America will establish base rules for capitalism. They'll help rebuild the industries. They'll help establish democracy in Japan. They'll press for female suffrage, abolishment of a state religion. Shintoism is no longer the official religion. For Japan, it's going to have few resources, no overseas empire. It's going to benefit from U.S. aid and investments. It will not have a large defense budget because of U.S. protection. It could use its money on its industry and rebuilding its factories. The Japanese government will be dominated by liberal Democrats who cooperated with business. Japan, one of the continuities is that similar to before World War II, Japan's businesses and their industries will be sponsored by the government. So like Japan will have private companies, but the government will help subsidize them, give them tax breaks, etc. There is a big economic event you should know in Japan. It's called the Japanese Economic Miracle. The Japanese economy is going to boom and become the second biggest economy in the world. This is right after the devastatingness of World War II. The Japanese economy first began with labor-intensive exports, textiles, iron, and steel. Then Japan will shift to capital-intensive industries, so like electronics, cars, aircraft, shipping, electronics like phones, computers, telecommunication. Japan's economy will have rapid growth exporting electronics, cars, TVs in the 1960s to 80s. Japan will have a recession in the 1990s. But Japan's economy is going to boom because of its shift towards exporting electronics to the rest of the world. A lot of the Japanese products, like cars, computers, TVs, are made in Japan. Like Mitsubishi is a car company. Honda is Korean. So is Kia. But there's also Toshiba. Sony is from Japan. All those are Japanese companies. So Japan's going to become really big in making electronics and exporting electronics. Some countries are going to want to copy Japan. They see how Japan's economy is booming, and they're also going to focus on exporting electronics and technology. These countries are called the Little Tigers. They're Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, which is the big one, and Taiwan. They're going to follow Japan's model of export-driven industry for electronics. They're going to have an industrial wealth of capitalism, trade, which is going to lead to democratization. It's going to lead to pressure for reform. Both South Korea and Taiwan were originally dictatorships, but they do become democracies by the 1980s, more 1990s. Just like Japan, the government will help support the businesses, tax breaks, a little bit of subsidization, and they'll all be making electronics. A good example of a little tiger is South Korea. They have, South Korea has Kia, it has Nissan, those are car companies. It has Samsung, which I have on my phone products, my watch are Samsungs. Those are all examples. Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia are also joining these nations and are also focusing on exporting electronics. Let's talk about some wars in Asia, some proxy wars during the Cold War. We talked before how America and Russia never fought directly, but both countries will fight indirectly in third world nations. Russia invades Afghanistan and America helps the Afghani rebels. America has two examples of this, of proxy wars, the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Let's talk about the Korean War first. After World War II, Korea was divided at the 38th parallel. South Korea was an ally of America. It was under Syngman Rhee. North Korea was the communist state. In 1950, the North Korean troops are going to cross the 38th parallel and try to invade South Korea. America and the United Nations are going to get involved in the Korea, and they're going to push the communists back all the way to the Chinese border. So let me show you. They invade. Whee! America and their soldiers land, and they push them all the way back to the border. This is going to frighten China, and they're going to send 1 million soldiers in, and they're going to push the Americans and the United Nations all the way back, and the war is going to end right around here again. Both sides in 1953 will agree to a ceasefire at the 38th parallel, so the war will end where it began. We will stop all of Korea from becoming communist. Korea is still two countries today, which is going to be different from Vietnam. During this time, America will make an alliance system of non-communist countries, like we have NATO in Western Europe and North America. They're going to create something called SEATO, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. America was afraid of countries becoming communist during this time. This is part of the whole idea of we need to contain communism. If it starts spreading, it could spread everywhere. It's called the domino theory. So like when you drop a domino piece, it causes all the other pieces to fall. So America was afraid, like if we let Vietnam become communist, then Japan will become communist. Soon all of the Pacific will become communist. Next thing you know, we'll be speaking Russian. So we have to stop communism wherever it is. That's what the domino theory is. We need to contain it. Let's talk about Vietnam. From 1940 to 1945, Japan's going to occupy the whole area within the first couple of weeks of World War II. The Viet Cong, the Viet Minh originally, they were called the Viet Minh originally, are going to launch a guerrilla warfare against the Japanese. The end of the war saw the English, French, and Dutch determined to restore their colonies. The French want Vietnam back. America will grant the Philippines independence. The Vietnamese under Ho Chi Minh thought they would be given independence after World War II. They were not, so they're going to fight a guerrilla warfare against the French. Ho Chi Minh did declare independence, but then France reinvaded Vietnam after World War II. They're going to reassert colonial rule, recapture Saigon and South Vietnam. Ho and his followers, the Viet Minh, are going to conduct guerrilla warfare from the countryside. They'll be aided by communist China. The Viet Minh will defeat the French in 1954. In the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the Vietnamese surround the French army, and they eventually force them to surrender. The French are going to pull out of Vietnam. America had been giving money and aid to the French because they were afraid of all Vietnam becoming communist. In 1954, they're going to have the Geneva Conference. Vietnam will be temporarily divided between the northern Vietnamese, which is communist, and the southern Vietnamese, which is non-communist. They promised to have elections soon to see if they'd be reunited. The US at first supported the French, and they'll support the unpopular government of South Vietnam. The South Vietnamese will not hold elections because they would have lost. The North Vietnamese will receive assistance from the USSR and China. America, throughout the 1960s, will get more involved in Vietnam. Northern Vietnam, let's not make any assumptions. Northern Vietnam was a totalitarian state. Ho Chi Minh killed his opinions. Ho Chi Minh killed his opponents. He had gulags. They were a dictatorship. But South Vietnam was not popular. They were seen as an American puppet. A lot of Vietnamese wanted to unite. And America is going to get more involved because if they didn't, all Vietnam would have fallen and become communist much earlier. We're going to start bombing Vietnam in 1964. We're going to start putting more soldiers in the late 50s, early 60s. We're going to start launching attacks in the 60s. Throughout this whole time, the US presidents like Lyndon Johnson, John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon were saying we were winning Vietnam, but we just had more and more people dying. The Vietnamese were doing guerrilla warfare. This was the first war that used television also. So there were some really like bad pictures that were televised on the news, like of an American soldier killing a Vietnamese person who looked like he was just a normal person. That person actually had killed some people before that, but like you don't kill an unarmed person. There's a famous picture of a girl running naked who just like was burned from napalm. There were stories of massacres that the American soldiers did during Vietnam. Honestly, like a lot of the stuff that happened in Vietnam was probably not any different than what happened when we did in World War II, but it's just much more televised now. This is during the time of the anti-war movement and the hippies, so more and more Americans are going to turn against the Vietnam War. This is going to basically destroy President Johnson's presidency. American troops will be trapped into a quagmire until President Nixon pulls out all U.S. soldiers in 1973. And America will leave Vietnam by 1975. North Vietnam will invade South Vietnam, and now all Vietnam is communist. So we do lose this war. This is going to have a big psychological impact on America, where it's going to lead to like the stagnant 70s, where we feel like we lost, we're not the great nation anymore. There's going to be huge inflation during this time. It's going to lead to a lot of soul searching. But that's all for those areas of land. We're going to talk about China next class. Until next time, guys. Deuces. Deuces, deuces.